and become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Since, potentially, world-ending bombs were invented and deployed to help end the Second World War, the world has lived in terror ever since. These nuclear bombs with ever-increasing power have the ability to vaporise not only people but entire buildings, towns and cities. Thankfully, although the world has continued to wage war after the Second World War, nuclear weapons have not been used in combat since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Seemingly, world leaders are acutely aware of the destructive potential of nuclear weapons. A military strategy called mutually assured destruction has prevented the superpowers of the world from launching nuclear attacks at each other. This strategy means that if an attack is launched against a nation, the defending nation will automatically launch a counter-nuclear attack. Thus, both nations will be destroyed, taking perhaps all life on Earth with it. However, many believe that as nuclear weapons exist in the thousands, on a long enough timeline they will be deployed again. This could either be by accident in an act of war or by terrorists. Terrorist attacks are increasingly common across the world, and as seen by ISIS, their military and strategic sophistication are growing. It is not hard to imagine they may one day get their hands on a nuclear weapon. For example, it is known that Al-Qaeda tried to buy highly enriched uranium in Sudan in the 90s. However, thankfully the sellers were scammers. Also, according to Valerie Plame Wilson, an ex-CIA covert operations officer, Osama bin Laden had meetings with Pakistani nuclear scientists before the September 11 attacks. Allegedly, bin Laden believed that in order to balance the scale of Muslim deaths caused by the US military, 4 million Americans would have to die. Also, the Japanese doomsday cult Shinrikyo tried to buy a nuclear bomb in Russia. This same group would later release a sarin gas chemical weapon attack on Tokyo's subway. They also bought a sheep farm in Australia in an attempt to mine uranium. Worryingly, after the fall of the Soviet Union, there were many instances of enriched uranium and plutonium ending up for sale on the black market. Because of the poverty in countries like Russia, workers with access to nuclear materials have stolen them and tried to sell them on to help pay their bills. In many of these cases, the materials were barely guarded. Although many of these sellers were caught, it is unclear if any of these materials had made it into the wrong hands. However, perhaps even more frighteningly, the world has already escaped a nuclear war on more than one occasion that on paper should have already happened. In 1960, the US even mistook the moon for nuclear missiles. Radar communications mislaid a message that missiles were heading for the US. In actuality, the new radar station in Greenland was picking up the moon rising over Norway. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, an American aircraft was shot down by Soviet forces whilst flying over Cuba. This caused tensions to escalate in an already highly tense standoff. Later that day, a Soviet submarine attempted to break through a US blockade the Navy had established around Cuba. The USS Beale destroyer attempted to make the submarine surface by deploying practice depth charges. However, the B-59 submarine that was equipped with nuclear torpedoes thought they were under attack. The submarine's captain, Valentin Savitsky, ordered a nuclear strike on the ship. In order for the strike to go ahead, all 3 senior officers had to agree to the launch. However, the second-in-command, Vasily Arkhipov, defied his captain's orders and refused to go along with the plan. This would not be the last time nuclear war was prevented by one man alone. Also, in 1979, someone had slipped a defence exercise tape into the NORAD HQ computers without informing anyone. The team believed the exercise was real, and computers showed thousands of missiles heading towards the US. The US prepared for a counterattack, but 6 minutes later, satellites revealed no launch had taken place. It then emerged a technician had accidentally put in the training tape. In 1980, a faulty computer chip nearly sparked devastation. Because of this malfunction, computers showed numerous Russian missiles were headed for the US. However, as the very nature of the missile launches was illogical, they were able to rule it out as a false alarm. The same fault happened again only 3 days later, and the faulty chip was finally found. Errors on the Russian side also almost caused catastrophe. In 1983, a satellite reading showed US missiles were heading for Russia. The commanding officer of the bunker, Stanislav Petrov, who received the reading, decided not to pass on the message to his Soviet superiors. He knew that if he did, they would launch a retaliatory attack on the US. Petrov reasoned that as the reading only showed 5 missiles, it was not a real attack, because if the US did launch an attack, it would show hundreds of missiles. It was later discovered that a Soviet satellite had mistaken sunlight reflecting off the top of clouds as missiles. In 1995, the world was almost plunged into nuclear war accidentally. This happened when the US launched a space rocket from Norway to study the Northern Lights. Somehow, although the Americans had warned Russia that they would be launching a missile in the name of science, it was not passed on to the people in charge. So, when this missile was picked up by radar, it was interpreted as a nuclear missile launch on Russia by an American submarine. This meant for the first time ever, the Russian nuclear launch codes were in place and the button was open and ready to be pushed. At the time, it was President Boris Yeltsin that had the final decision. Yeltsin arguably saved the world when he decided not to launch a counterattack. He did not believe the US was launching an attack. Incredibly, one man's decision stopped a nuclear war, a decision that went against Russia's official protocol. In theory, he should have pressed the button. Many accidents have also occurred when planes carrying nuclear weapons have crashed. Places such as Spain and Greenland have suffered nuclear pollution because of this. In 1961, a B-52 bomber broke apart over North Carolina. This caused 2 nuclear bombs to fall from the sky. One bomb deployed a parachute and landed safely. However, the other bomb fell to the ground, and 5 out of 6 safety features failed, meaning only one safety feature prevented a nuclear explosion. In 1968, a US submarine named the USS Scorpion sank into the ocean with nuclear weapons that were never recovered. Also, a military aircraft carrying a nuclear weapon rolled off an aircraft carrier in Japan and sank into the ocean. This weapon was never recovered. These are just some examples of nuclear accident and bombs going missing. This shows that the detonation of a nuclear bomb that kills millions is almost inevitable. Certainly, on a long enough timeline, it is certain to happen. Whether that is by human error, machine error, war or terrorism, the threat of nuclear bombs is ever present. Certainly the threat is increasing in Europe as Russia and Ukraine battle it out in Eastern Europe, with NATO and other outside influences muddying and escalating the war. Despite the massive power displayed in early footage of considerably weak bombs, many question whether a nuclear war would destroy the Earth.
I have been asked whether, in the years to come, it will be possible to kill 40 million American people in the 20 largest American towns by the use of atomic bombs in a single night. I am afraid that the answer to that question is yes.
But even if you were one of the millions or billions that were not vaporized or killed via radiation poisoning, the Earth itself may die. This is because the massive mushroom clouds, soot and smoke would blanket the Earth, blocking out the sun. This, according to a study by Cheryl Harrison of LSU, would bring about global cooling more drastic than the last ice age. The temperature would in fact drop globally by 13 degrees. The same study showed that 100 million people would die in the first hour by the initial blasts. Then, as crops die with the drastic temperature drop, around 1 to 2 billion people would face starvation. This would also freeze parts of the ocean, rendering many shipping routes unpassable. This would mean food and supplies could not effectively be transported across the world. The blocking of the sun and its light would cause marine algae to die. This would cause a famine in the ocean, meaning more food sources would die off. Nuclear explosions could also trigger volcanic eruptions, which would further block out the sun and kill anyone still left in the vicinity. Undoubtedly, the ones that caused the war would be best equipped to survive one. World leaders, for example, could enter stockpiled underground bunkers and remain there indefinitely until the radiation reaches safe levels and the nuclear winter is over. Safe in their underground bunkers while the rest of the world is obliterated, starved off and frozen to death.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.